My name is Pell Edward Johnson. I was born and raised in St. Peter, Minnesota, June 26, 1931. I spent my entire life there until the war came along. At that point in time, I was at University of Minnesota studying architecture. I was not doing too well, so I was on the verge of getting drafted, so I enlisted. And that's rather unique because my cousin, Dwight Johnson, who came up to my home on Saturday morning, woke me out of bed, and he said, "Let's go enlist in the Army." I thought, well, why not? I'm going to go in anyway. So we went to Mankato, and we enlisted in the Army, and it was kind of amusing in retrospect. The recruiting sergeant said, "Well, what is your specialty? What would you like to do when you get out?" I didn't have the intelligence to say I want to ambush the mailman down the street. So I said, I don't know, and so we ended up in the infantry. And about 2 days later, we went to Fort Riley, Kansas, went to Minneapolis first, got into the program, enlisted, got our pay of $47 a month for life and limb and food and beverages and clothing. And then by train, we went to Fort Riley, Kansas. And went into the depot there, and then got through the swearing in and the physicals, issued clothing, and then to a temporary barracks overnight. And we went to Dog Company, 87th Infantry Regiment of the 10th Infantry Division. And there we were there for 14 weeks. And we got there, I ended up being a squad leader in the 4th Platoon, and went through our typical basic training of a close order drill on up through every weapons that were available at that point in time. And then we've completed that basic training. I went to 25th Field Artillery Battalion for leadership school, and I was there for, I believe, 4 weeks. Maybe 8 weeks. Yeah. Then I was sent overseas to on board General John Pope. We landed in Yokohama, went to Camp Drake, spent the night, turned all our equipment in, got issued new equipment, and we flew to a transport plane to Seoul, Korea, at Gimpo Airfield. And there at a rebel depot, we stayed overnight in the driving rain in squad tents. And next morning, we were all mustered out and sent to units. My name was not called, so I went up. I said, "You didn't call me." And he said, "Well, we'll get you tomorrow." So the next day, I went up with about a dozen other guys, and I was dropped off with 2 other guys at Heavy Mortar Company. And I was sent to the commo section, and that started my Korean experience.
Mm-hmm. So what unit was that?
That was Heavy Mortar Company, 5th Cav Regiment, part of the 1st Cavalry Division.
And what was some of the duties for that
Okay,
unit?
I was in communications section. I did not have an MOS for communications, but they didn't know what to do with me. I had an infantry MOS, and so the first step was to learn how to run a switchboard, then learn how to use the Morse code, radio techniques, and that was my job. And eventually I stayed there for 2 years in that company, in that same unit, ended up being a comm sergeant. And when I got discharged, I was a sergeant first class, E9, I think. But we were online all the time I was there. The unit that was on line Wyoming. Then they went into October to line Jamestown, and our unit was then spread out across the front in the area of Old Baldy, which was a very strategic point because of its proximity to what was the highest point in the area, and had a commanding view of the Yokok River and is a key area for the stability of the line. We were there. It was a very difficult time to get it from the Chinese. They had it dug in with bunkers, and we were there. We succeeded in driving them off. I think it was 4 days or 5 days battle, and then we occupied that. Then it was in October the Chinese hit it in the evening, and it precipitated a 3-day battle. This was the first battle, the second battle of 8 subsequent battles for the control of that monumental piece of property, and it kept changing hands all through the war. And in October, then the Chinese hit, and the unit got shot up really bad, really bad. And so they pulled us off and put us into Corps Reserve in the 45th Infantry Division. We had been in training in Hokkaido, Japan, came in and occupied that our position. And that was in, let's see, I think that, well, it was just before Thanksgiving. Because we were in north of Uijeonbu, we were there waiting to be shipped to Japan. And that's where we had a Thanksgiving dinner. And surprisingly, I kept the menu that we served. It was very cold, damn cold. And I never forget, I hadn't had a shower for 4 months. And there was a stream flowing by where my tent was. So I took a clean pair of underwear, went out on the river. There was a little stream flowing through there, stripped down, and took my first bath in 4 months. It felt heavenly. It was colder than hell. Prior to that time, I was still up on line. We had a 3/4 ton truck, and I built that in, boxed it in preparation for winter, because I knew damn well if it was going to be there, it was going to be cold. And this is before we were still online. And built it in, and it was fine, except one night was on radio operation, and I was on a late shift. Beautiful moonlight night, never forget it. Frost on the ground. And I come off duty, and a guy came up, Dave Cornell, who relieved me, came up. He says, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Don't know. I had near carbon monoxide poisoning. Another hour in there, I'd have been dead or neck. So that's the closest I came to getting killed. But then we rotated from Uijeonbu. We left all our gear there. It just took our personal equipment. And we got onto a train with no windows, an overcoat, pile cap, and I had a can of heat that I put inside on the floor under my overcoat to keep warm. And we went from there to Incheon, and it was interesting. I got off the train, and we were walking to our vessel, George S. Clymer, and we were marching along in column, not marching, walking. And I walked by a first aid tent, and for some reason, I stopped. I looked at that tent, and there had to be something about it I didn't know until way later, after discharge and everything, that my cousin Dwight, who I enlisted with, was in that tent as a corpsman. And I was within 20 feet of him and didn't know it. So we got on to the George S. Clymer, and we went up the coast to Hokkaido. And on the way, we passed the battleship Missouri, drove into the port of Muro-Ran, I believe, and it was a snowstorm. It cold off. It was just before Christmas. Snow. Got to our base at Camp Chitose and settled in. And you had a bunch of guys that just got offline, and most of us were kids. Hell, I was 20 years old, and unsure what civilian life was going to be like, what we would like being offline. You've been up on line I was only up there for 4 months or 5 months. Some of the guys have been up there for almost a year. And it was rather dramatic. And So there I spent, golly, I have to look at my calendar here. Stayed at, oh God, it must have been in March, April, that we, then our unit was taken out and we went to, December 7th, 51, we left Korea for Japan.
Before we get too far away,
Yeah.
what was the names of the battles or the missions, or like what
Boy.
locations, the ones that you were talking about just a bit ago? That
Just,
were really
I was
scary?
basically on Obalde. That's was the only area that I was focused on in my short term, and that was enough. From then on, I was rear echelon for the rest of my career. Day routine, same every day, and like I said, I had one shower in July until I took a bath in the river in November, and pretty grim as far as that is concerned. But actually, it was good duty, to be perfectly frank with you. And I stayed with that company for 2 years and ended up being a sergeant first class. We were in Hokkaido for almost a year, and then we went to Amphibious Landing, and then we went down to Kojido, the prison camp. There was a riot there just before we got there. We were there for a month, and I came from there to UNCAC, United States Civil Assistance Command, and there we were at guard duty, and then I went into a PW camp and did guard duty there, and that's where I rotated from. Ended back in the States in July. Yeah, the armistice was signed when I was on way home, and ended up in Denver. Charlie Company with a 8-inch howitzer company battalion as a comm sergeant, and that's why I discharged.
So can you describe for me what was the time at Kojido like?
Kojido was the Chinese prisoners the Korean prisoners had overthrown the PW commander, basically. They captured the general and held him prisoner, General Dodd. And they came walking in, the army came in and took it away from the Chinese, or the Koreans, and it was not very, it was damn miserable. A good friend of mine was part of that, and he got a whiff of nausea gas and threw up in his gas mask, damn near drowned, and it was not easy. But when I got there, things were settled down, and we were doing absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. The only thing we hit there was a typhoon. And so it was strictly dog work, guard duty, nothing spectacular. Back at UNCAC, there again it was totally rear echelon guard duty. The only challenging there was May Day, which is communist holiday. And we had several thousand people outside the gate, and we were all concerned that some damn fool would shoot somebody, but they didn't. That was the only excitement. Well, there were some people did get shot up there, and the Kojido, or pardon me, the PW camp, that was interesting. I would go into the compound and walk around the fences with a 45 and a flashlight. Yeah, that was interesting. Because one night I come down, walk down through this between Quartel Sally Port, between fences on each side, double barbed wire, high fences, and walk back. About 2 hours later, 2 prisoners tried to escape, and they shot them up. So I probably walked right by those guys and never saw them. But rather unglamorous, not life-threatening to me. A job. I did a good job. I grew up. In retrospect, I think the saddest part, the thing that affected me most. And I didn't realize that until I got home. And I had I was in Seoul, and Busan, and we were downtown, and a little girl came up. She's probably 5 years old, with a sea ration can. She held this. I got a picture of her, and she had the sea ration can up to me for some money, and that one stuck with me. And I remember the time I had taken that shower, and I saw all these civilians walking down the road to nowhere. And all they had was what's on their back. If they died, what happened to them? I have no idea. But there they go.
So how many months were you in Korea?
I was in Korea twice. First time around was July to November, and then I was there let's see, that'd be December, March, May through July of 53, yeah. So it was a year and 4 months, probably, something like that. That'd be about right, I think, yeah.
And you said you were on your way home? Sorry. Did you say you were on your way home when the armistice was signed?
Yeah, it was on board ship.
And when the word
came to us, we all said, they stopped the war because they didn't kill us. There's nobody else to shoot that was worthwhile, so to speak. We're joking, obviously. But, yeah, it was on board ship when the armistice was signed. It was a very happy day. Nothing to celebrate with, though, except yippee. Yeah.
What was the reception like when you got home?
The reception in Seattle was very nice. The people lined up and welcomed us home, and it was great. The bond you build with your compatriot in the Army is very, very tight, very tight. And our trip to Denver from Seattle was very interesting. I think the whole strip was lined with beer bottles, from Seattle to Denver. It was a grand trip. And we had all grown up to a point. We were still kids, 21, right in there. But our outlook in life was entirely different. I would venture that every one of us was very apprehensive, what's next? Because in the Army, in the Army, your whole life is regimented. You know exactly what you're going to do, what you wear, what you eat, how you respond to everybody. And now you're going to go back in society that you left as a very young man, unsure of your future, and here you're right back again, unsure of your future. And when I came home, I walked out the back door the day after I got home, and my friend drove by in a car, and he looked at me and says, "Hey, where you been?" I was gone for 3 years, and nobody gave a damn. That's what my feeling was at that time. So Vietnam had a bad break, but so did we.